for different opportunities. But then transition between elementary and middle is, I get a lot of calls about it. My name is Tina Lewis. If I haven't met you before, I'm director of Giftwood TV. I probably know most of your names on paper, and your kids' names on paper, and even my face. But it's always fun to to come and see here. Just on these different topics that we've been able to present. One of the next one that we have is in February 26th, and this is going to be talking about like different challenges with this, but this is more of a K-12 because the presenter is really secondary based. So just to let you know that one's coming up, and then the last one of yours one that I will do, and that's really because we're finishing our gifted testing by the end of the year, and a lot of parents like first time identify, okay, now what does this mean? What are my options? What should I do? So those are the last two that we've had, and this is the fourth of this year. And all of them, we have links to video online. One was by Dr. Belgian, who does a lot of pediatric neuropsych and does a lot of our testing. One was on Laura Lingers, and she does on mindfulness. And then Karen Brown, our gifted program manager, started off the year by doing social emotion. So I encourage you to go onto our gifted website, look at our parent resource link, and take a look at those. And then we also have archived from past years. So just want to give you that overview. We have these in collaboration with United Parent Council. UPC is our premier parent group for the district, and we have a collaboration with them so that they have a gifted parent, and we schedule these, we brainstorm this summer to talk about different topics. And so Melissa Schwartz is our president of that, and before I introduce herself very briefly, I also want to introduce my right hand, Deanna Cheverdine. She is our testing coordinator and takes care of all of our, helps me with our teachers and coordinating and all of that. So I'll say, so briefly, then I'll introduce our speaker.
Yes, so welcome and thank you for coming out on this rainy evening. As Dina said, United Parent Council is kind of your PTAs at a district level. So we have representatives from each of our schools, or most of our schools, that come together and work on a district level to provide programs like this with not only our gifted program, but with our special ed and our new immersion program. So in the back you'll see an orange flyer that has a whole bunch of other events. We do our regular monthly meetings, usually the third Wednesday of the month, but because of spring break and other things in February and March, or actually I guess January, February, March is the second Wednesday for some reason. So we're here tomorrow morning, and our presenter tomorrow morning will be Dr. Jason Reynolds and Dr. Mitch Von Echten talking about restorative practices. So you can learn more, but we gave you a little snippet of some of those events that are coming up. We have quite a few of them in just February and January. We have many more scheduled, as you mentioned, in March. We'll be letting you know about those. You can always find them and our live links to these events on our Facebook page. So please like our Facebook, which is UPC PVUSD, and it's on the bottom of the page. You don't need to write it down. It's on every one of the flyers. So thank you for coming tonight, and enjoy.
So it's my great pleasure to introduce to you our speaker tonight, Mr. David Graham, who has been teaching in our district for 10 years.
8 years. Yeah, last year.
Okay. So he did a student teaching here, was a cluster teacher in a Christian classroom, and then he came to work in our digital learning center, which is our second team for middle school, and helped with basically just build that program. And now he's assistant principal at another district in Fountain Hills. But he was gracious enough to come back and speak to you about this topic, which is near and dear to his heart as a middle school teacher. Transitioning kids into middle school, transitioning gifted kids into middle school. So thanks again for coming. And I should also mention he teaches with me at Arizona State University, the graduate courses in gifted, and presents nationally for gifted.
So, gifted education is one of those things that I'm incredibly passionate about, and in particular, like she said, middle school gifted education. when I got my first position, it was over at Shea Middle School, and it was a middle school special education position. So I did the interview, I met with the principal, and he offered me the position. I accepted it. He told me that middle school is the type of age group that you're either going to know within 3 years if it's for you. He said in about 3 years, you're either going to go down to elementary or up to high school. And if it's not for you, you're going to, or if it is for you, you're going to be here for the rest of your life. So as a teacher, I was there for 8 years and I loved every minute. Currently, I'm the assistant principal of Fountain Hills High School in the Fountain Hills Unified School District. And one of my big things is working with a lot of freshmen as they transition because I understand middle school students. So I'm very close to this topic. And a big part of it is that middle school kind of gets overlooked. You know, if we look at kind of the continuum of education, elementary is where we build our foundation. You know, we talk about early intervention is key. We want to make sure that we're getting students the needs that they have early, whether that be special education, English language services, or gifted. We want to make sure we address that early. So elementary gets looked upon very favorably. Then we look at high school, and that's where it all matters. Your GPA matters, your grades matter. This is going to establish you for college. And then we look at middle school and it's like, well, you're kind of sandwiched in there, so thanks. And it gets overlooked. And so many people I talk to are like, middle school, my gosh, that was the worst year of my life. And so part of what I want to talk about is how we can address that with our gifted middle school students. So we have 3 objectives here today.
Before you do that, can I just have that one thing to introduce your former counterpart who Kendall is here. She's the other Digital Learning Center middle school gifted 17 teachers. So they helped develop this program together. And I'm sorry I can't mention that anymore.
So when we look at the objectives for tonight's presentation, we're going to be talking about 3 different things. And they're all going to be mushed together. It's not going to be a clean presentation in all of this, but we're going to be looking at the transition from elementary to middle school. We're going to be looking at social and emotional needs of gifted middle school students. And we're also going to be talking about ways to understand how we can best support middle school gifted students through this transition. The lens through which we're going to look at this is through Calvin and Hobbes. And this is Bill Watterson. He's the creator of Calvin and Hobbes. And a little bit of background information about me. Just on the surface, I love what I love, and I'm going to talk about what I love. And I find ways to talk about what I love in any way possible. And so when I was in high school, I started cartooning. I started drawing little doodles of my adventures in high school. And sometimes it was a way to vent about things. Sometimes it was just I had a funny idea, and I would just doodle it. And so I started building my repertoire of being a cartoonist. When I got to ASU, I was taking it more seriously, and I actually submitted and got accepted. And I cartooned for ASU's newspaper, and a daily strip that ran. Now, one of the things about any sort of art form and something that you love, you look at the greats. You look at how they do what they do. And so I use that as an excuse to read countless amounts of comic strips. I read Peanuts, I read Luann, I read Pearls Before Swine, but my favorite was Calvin and Hobbes. And I loved Calvin and Hobbes dearly. And the way that Bill Watterson captured adolescence and some of the magic of being a kid, the frustrations that come with it. And it wasn't until my student teaching, where I student taught in a gifted clustered classroom, that I had a realization, and that is that Calvin is a gifted child. So when we think about a gifted student, we think about the typical gifted student. If you ask somebody their stereotypical gifted student, they would probably envision somebody like Susie, who says, I love my school books. Just think, pretty soon we'll have read all of this. I like to read ahead and see what we're going to learn next. It's so exciting to know stuff. Having a book is like having a good friend with you. And Calvin then says, if you flip the pages of my book, my animated T-Rex drives the Batmobile and explodes. And Susie then says, sometimes I think books are the only friends worth having. If we think stereotypical gifted child, someone's going to envision Susie, somebody that's going to read ahead, do everything that they're expected to do, and be the perfect child. But in reality, some look like Susie, but some turn out more like Calvin. And this was the strip that really cemented for me that he was a gifted child. Calvin's working on a project and Hobbs comes up and says, how's the diorama coming along? Calvin says, I'm almost finished. Hobbs replies with, that didn't take too long. And Calvin says, that's because I'm a genius. Hobbs says, I don't see the Roadrunner. Aren't you going to put one in? And he says, see the cotton balls I glued on? Yeah. The Roadrunner just ran out of the scene, leaving those clouds of dust. So, this is a funny comic. But we have to think about what is really going on here. Calvin, in doing his project, has found any way to not actually do his project. But what's even more fascinating about this, he's using his background knowledge. He's taking what he's learned. He's watched Roadrunner cartoons, where the Roadrunner says beep beep, his legs twirl around in a circle and zooms off and leaves a cloud of dust. So we look at this and we're like, it's funny, he's trying to get out of his work. But we have a lot of gifted students that are trying to get out of the work. But what is so fascinating is he's not just not turning it in. He's using background knowledge, and he's creating something special. So what we're going to be looking at is we're going to be looking at who Calvin is as a gifted learner. One of the things that we need to understand, though, is that our gifted learners are incredibly varied. One of the things that's really fascinating is that you could look down a classroom of gifted students, and they're all going to have different traits, characteristics, and there are a lot of things that might overlap. But really, they're just as varied as any other student group on campus. And you're not going to see just one size fits all. There's one trait that we typically see, though, and that's asynchronous development. With asynchronous development, we have students that are thinking well above their age level peers. They could be thinking 2, 3, 4, even more grades ahead. And intellectually, they're having these stimulating conversations. But emotionally, they're with their typical peers, if not lower. And so that's a very difficult thing to deal with, where they can be having these profound conversations with you, yet little things that you're like, this shouldn't be a big deal, are a big deal. And we can look at Calvin as Calvin is sitting there and saying, I'm a genius, but I'm a misunderstood genius. Hobbs asks him, what's misunderstood about you? Nobody thinks I'm a genius. And so we have a 6-year-old child that is sitting there thinking about the fact that he's misunderstood, he's a genius, yet he put his shirt on incorrectly. And I can tell you from teaching gifted middle school students, this doesn't change. I've had students come with mismatching shoes, and I'm like, why aren't your shoes tied? And I'm having to have these conversations about, like, get a tissue, these silly things, yet we're sitting there talking about all quiet on the Western Front, and really digging deep into the way that Germany looked at nationalism and handled the war, and how that made individual soldiers feel and make them lose their identity. These profound discussions are intersected with, like, if you have to go to the bathroom, like, sign out, like, these little things. So when we talk about asynchronous development, we have to understand that our gifted students, that's one of the things that we have to account for. Now, one of the great things about a lot of elementary schools is that they have gifted programming for schools, or for students. And in the Paradise Valley School District, there's a myriad of options for students between self-contained, the pull-out programs, the cluster models. There's a lot of options available. And so when we look at this is a great situation for a gifted student. You have a teacher that gets to know the student very well. You have one teacher that has a set of expectations that they are able to lay out for the students, that are able to work with that student. If a student doesn't turn in work, they're able to coax it out of them and build that up and build them up. It's a really great thing. And so for a child like Calvin, and we have to understand that Calvin and Hobbes was written in the late 80s, early 90s. So we're not working with up-to-date gifted education research. His teacher is not differentiating for him, she's not understanding him, and all of that. But let's say that Calvin does go through a proper elementary school gifted program. It's great, everything's perfect, but we have to ask the question, what happened to my hair? What do we do when Calvin goes to middle school? if we look at this, we have to realize that everything is going to fundamentally change for our gifted children with that transition. They've gone from elementary school where there is one teacher that knows them, is advocating for them, and building them up. And now they're moving to a new school where, in many cases, they have 7 different teachers, each with expectations, each with varying subjects that may or may not be that child's strength, each with standards that they have to meet. We have an entirely new social situation. You're not just in the class with your 20, 30 peers, and you might sometimes interact with the other teacher's class, but you got your friends within there. But now you've got hundreds of students that you're interacting with. Now you've got a school that starts earlier. And all of these things build up, and suddenly our students are thrown into a crazy situation. So, one of the other pieces of that, as we look at the structure that has changed, the values are also changing. When gifted students are in elementary school, the teacher is the primary person for whom the gifted students are looking at for that acceptance. They're looking at that teacher saying, hey, what is expected of me? What do I need to be doing? How does this work? And the teacher gives them feedback and guides them and does that. But once they get to middle school, their teacher's not a constant. They have 7 different teachers, all with varying expectations. What does become a constant? Their peer group. And so that's a dramatic shift for a lot of gifted students as they move in their education. As we look at all of this, it is not uncommon, or it's no wonder that people have a negative perception of middle school. Calvin is sitting here and says, I hate school, I'm not going to school ever again, I refuse, and we see him flying out of the house. He says, I think Mom let her in shot put her junior year. It's very frustrating when we see gifted students who might have loved school, suddenly not enjoy it. And I didn't even talk about all the physical or hormonal changes that gifted students are going under on top of that. Because you can have a class of students and every single one of them is changing on a daily basis. It's a lot to manage. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be breaking down kind of some of the core attributes and look at what we can do to help our students transition appropriately. So the first thing that we're going to be looking at is self-image. Self-image is something that is really important when we look at middle school in general, especially when we look at gifted middle school students. Self-image itself can take a variety of forms when we look at the middle school life. One of the big things as well when we look at all of this is that this transition is confusing for everyone involved. It's not just confusing for the kids, it's confusing for parents as well. The world that gifted middle school students are entering into middle school is far different than the world that you or I entered into in middle school. The world that they're entering into is changed from when an older sibling went through it. It's all rapidly changing, and it can be incredibly confusing for students. We can sit here and look, and Calvin is saying, look, a decoder ring. Now we can send each other secret messages in code. Haha, now Mom and Dad won't be able to understand this at all. And Calvin reflects, not that they do anymore. Now this comment right here, I feel says a lot about the middle school experience. Because for a lot of gifted middle school students, they don't feel like anyone's gone through what they've gone through. And it might be different, but there are a lot of things that you've gone through, that I've gone through, that they are also going through. And one of the things that we have to understand is that for gifted students especially, experience is a big part of that. Sometimes they have to stumble to understand like, oh, maybe I should listen to you. They have to touch the hot stove before they'll listen and say, oh, hot things burn, and go from there. In many cases, gifted youth leaving elementary school, moving from being known and respected for their intellectual ability in a familiar environment to being unknown and perhaps disrespected in an unfamiliar environment. One of the things that we have to understand is that in a lot of instances, our students are not going to be appreciated by their peer group for their intellectual ability or the ways that they're going to be thinking about things. We look at Calvin and Hobbes again. Calvin's sitting here, and this is part of the story arc that Bill Watterson did revolving around organized sports. And Calvin's sitting in a train and says, I don't understand it, Hobbes. The kid sees me when I didn't play baseball. Then they yelled at me when I did play. Then the teacher called me a quitter when I stopped playing. Unless you're a star, you can't please anyone. Hobbes asks, in that case, why not just please yourself? And Calvin responds with, because mom won't let me move to Madagascar. Now, again, Calvin is saying so much about the middle school experience. Because in this, he's ridiculed for not doing what other kids are doing. And then when he does it and he's not good at it, he's ridiculed again. And then the adult in his life is not supporting him when he says, hey, this is not for me. And in the midst of all of this, Calvin is trying to figure out how he fits in. He's trying to figure out who he is and what he should be doing in this situation. And for our gifted middle school students, this can be very difficult because they're getting hit with all of these angles. They're having students that are saying, it's not cool to do this, or you need to be prioritizing other things about your education. They have other students that are saying, well, prioritize this. Other students that are saying, prioritize this. And they're trying to make sense of it all. Then when they do pick a lane that might not be what the teacher says well, that's not the right lane you're supposed to be picking. And they're like, I don't understand. And then parent email goes out, and the parents say, well, why aren't you picking the right lane? And they're like, I don't understand. What we have to be careful with this is that this can cause gifted students to not produce work. As they're trying to figure it all out, it's easier just to avoid than to actually commit. And this is one of those things that in my experience working with gifted students, the first semester is a very difficult transition. Because you have students that are trying to figure it all out. And there's a lot of frustration. And it requires a lot of work and support to help build those students up. In an effort to fit in with the values of a new social group, gifted middle school students may opt to hide their intellectual abilities by underperforming academically. Now, when we read a statement like this, it sounds ridiculous. Like, that makes no sense. But I can tell you from experience, I was in high school. My senior year, I was taking Calculus BC, and for some reason, Calculus and I were friends. We got along. I understood Calculus, Calculus understood me. We got along. I don't know why, but it just worked. For some of my other friends, the relationship wasn't as nice. It was a little bit rockier. And consistently, after quizzes and tests, the students, my peer group, they would talk about, like, man, that test was awful, or the teacher didn't teach that well. And I can distinctly remember grabbing my quizzes or tests and putting them quickly in my backpack to not show I understood what was going on. And that's what our gifted middle school students are doing. But they might not have the drive or the confidence to do well. So we have to understand that sometimes when your gifted middle school student might be struggling, it's not because they're not understanding or they're not capable. It's because they don't know where to get the validation, how to have it self-confidence, because they're looking at it from a variety of places. We have Calvin and Hobbes again. Calvin says, I've decided we should be cooler than we are. Hobbes says, we're not cool. Sure, we're cool, but we're not as cool as we could be. Cool people wear dark glasses. Hobbes asks, it's cool to bump into things. And Calvin says, you don't move, you just hang around. So one of the things that we have to look at when we're talking about the transition from middle school, or elementary to middle school for gifted students, is finding a program that's a good fit. One of the great things about middle school is that it's a fresh start for every student there. And not every program is going to be the right fit for every kid. And it's something that we have to understand about who our gifted learners are. We have to understand what values they have and what they find interesting. Because as we are looking at that, we have to really kind of dig deep. and find something that's going to support them, because once we find a program that supports them, then they've got a social group that's able to build them up and has a similar view, so that they have that, so that we don't necessarily have that rough transition. Now, when we talk about self-image, perfectionism is a offshoot of self-image, and I have a whole section devoted to this concept. And for many gifted middle school students, this is a reality that they face. So this is essentially the inverse of what we talked about just now. Because before we were talking about that some students might hide their intellectual abilities, they won't produce work because they're trying to get in, and they're trying to pick a lane, and sometimes that lane isn't the academic lane. On the complete opposite side of this, you have those students that their self-image of themselves is that they need to be perfect. And so one of the things I hope you understand already is just how confusing middle school can be. Because as a middle school gifted teacher, I didn't just have, oh, every one of my students is a perfectionist, so I can address it this way. I had the students that weren't producing, the students that were perfectionists. And if you have a child that is going into middle school, I don't know what your child is going to feel like. It could be a mixture. So that's one of the things that we need to understand. Perfectionism means that you can never fail. You always need approval, and if you come in second, you're a loser. I like this definition of perfectionism because I feel like it really hits on what perfectionism really is. Oftentimes when we look at people that are the best in their craft, we see them as perfectionists. But that's not the case. Because perfectionism is a dangerous thing, especially when we have children trying to go through things. If we look at these different pieces, you can never fail. We're going to talk all about failure and how important that is. But the thought that you can never fail means that if you do fail, it's devastating. You always need approval. You need that validation. And you're getting that validation by being perfect. And if you come in second, you're a loser. And I think that last piece is probably the most important thing on it. Because coming in second, if it means that you're the loser, it means that you fail. So anything less than perfect is devastating. Kind of reminds me of the Will Ferrell movie, Talladega Nights. You're not first, you're last. And in that movie, someone calls him out and it's like, that makes no sense. There's a whole bunch of other placings after first. That's what we need our gifted students to understand. Calvin says, everything is so darn hard. I wish I could just take a pill and to be perfect. I wish I could just push a button and have anything I want. House responds with the American dream lives on. Why should I have to work for everything? It's like saying I don't deserve it. So, when looking at education, failure is so important. Having that moment that you stumble, having that moment that you realize that you're not the best. And here's the difficult thing for a lot of gifted middle school students. They've never failed. They've gone through elementary school never having to face failure. They've gone through elementary school, and every challenge that comes their way, they're able to attack it and do great things with it. Every year I would start teaching my class, and so the Digital Learning Center is a project-based, cross-curricular learning environment for gifted middle school students. And so there are a lot of opportunities for students to work independently and do things. And I would start every year by asking my students, 7th graders coming in, how many, like, close your eyes, confidentiality. You don't have to worry about what your peers think. Raise your hand if you've ever waited until the last day to do a project. I'm talking like a big project. Every hand goes up. And I would see those students that are trying to weigh, like, should I be honest? Like, I see it painting them, and they're like gently raising their hand. And then I would follow it up with, leave your hand up if you've gotten an A. And every hand would stay up. Now, some students, they took that as like a sign of pride. They're like, yup. And like, they've got their hand up proud. They're like, me. And it's like, chill. The problem with this is that when they get to middle school, the first time that they might experience failure is in an unfamiliar environment with one of 7 teachers. And that's a scary thing. Because it's not the matter that our gifted students can't manage. It's the fact that they're having to juggle a whole bunch of different things. Even if we're not talking about a specialized program like the DLC, at any given time, 7 teachers are having 4 or 5 different classes, each with homework, each with expectations. You're going to have math regularly. You're going to have English papers. You're going to have social studies reading. You're going to have science labs that need writing. All of these things are going to happen. And there's only so many hours in the day. And when our gifted students have the first place that they fail, in middle school, it can shatter everything. So it's very important that we understand this and build in this understanding that it's through failure that we grow. One of the things I would always talk to my students about when I would explain this is when you go to the gym, if you're trying to get buff, you don't go grab the 2.5-pound weights. And you can't justify you're trying to go for tone. Like, that doesn't work. There's no resistance there. The way that you build muscle is you have to break it down first. The first project I would start with my students was a project called Why Do We Fall? And I would have them look up somebody that they would consider a hero. It could be anyone. I'm not going to sit there and judge who your hero is. They just need to be a living, breathing person. They can be alive, have passed away, but they need to be a person. But I don't want you to tell me about their success. The whole project was, tell me about their failure. And tell me about how they overcame it. See, that's one of those things that our gifted students, they need to see that. They need to see what failure actually looks like. And yeah, you can address that Einstein failed, or that whole idea that Einstein failed elementary school. But it needs to be something personal to the students. There's a really great Gatorade commercial that follows that same basic theme. And you have Michael Jordan, Serena Williams, you have a bunch of different athletes all talking about the times that they were cut, when they've lost in front of millions. But what makes you a champion is standing back up. And so that's one of the big things that we need our gifted middle school students to understand. And part of this comes from the way that we address the difficulties that they have. Part of my job as a teacher was to work with parents about, yeah, your kid might have failed the first project. They didn't turn it in or whatever it might be, but that's okay. How do we come back from that? And that was not only a shift for the kids, but for the parents as well. There were parents that have to tell, you need to step back. Let your child do what they're going to do and manage their grades. And for some parents, that was very difficult. But I always loved it when I would talk to parents at parent-teacher conferences, or I would see them somewhere and they would be like, yeah, I have not checked my kids' grades in a few weeks. How are they doing? And it's like, we're working. But they need to have that understanding. The students need to go out and try to figure out things on their own. The pursuit of excellence means taking risks, trying new things, growing, changing, and sometimes failing. If our gifted students never experience that failure, never take risks, they're never going to grow. And that piece about taking risks is very important. Because if we have students that are so afraid to fail, they don't take risks, they're not making the impact that they have the potential to make. One of the coolest things about our gifted students is they'll come up with these brilliant ideas. But ideas that nothing happens with are just ideas. Something needs to be done with them. And so if we don't teach our students that failure is okay, we risk them not taking risks. We risk them not going out for leadership positions. We risk them not trying to apply to the school that they want to go to. So this is a crucial time. In this comic, Calvin says, "Mom, hey mom!" His mom yells, "Calvin, stop yelling across the house. If you want to talk to me, walk over to the living room, where I am." Calvin walks across, and Calvin asks his mom, "I stepped and dogged you, where's the hose?" Now, whenever I talk about failure, it's one of those things that I get a lot of response from parents, and they're like, yeah, or teachers, when I'm presented to teachers, I get a lot of teachers like, you're right, failure is very important. But we also need to be comfortable showing our students that we make mistakes as well. One of the things that I've run into with teachers is teachers are not comfortable showing any sort of signs of vulnerability to their class, let alone their gifted students. And that's such a dangerous thing, because we're not comfortable making mistakes in front of our students. Where are they going to be comfortable making mistakes? Inevitably, whenever I would do a presentation, my students would catch a grammatical error, a spelling error, and they would address it. And I wouldn't sit there and argue with them about it. If I'm talking about history and I say something like, "Mr. Graham, I don't think that's right," I wouldn't be like, "Well, you're wrong, child, because age," and then like ignore it. I use that as an opportunity. If there was a grammatical error in my presentation, I would look at it and acknowledge, wow, that is awful. Now, depending on the tone that the student took, I might use that as a teachable moment to pull them aside and say, hey, I appreciate you telling me that, but this is the appropriate way to do this. But I'm not going to sit there and deny that I've messed up grammatically. And I'm going to leave you a secret. Sometimes I would leave grammatical errors in my presentations because it would bother my students. I once borrowed a colleague's, he had a really great Civil War presentation. I know a teacher that I used to work with at Sunrise, and when he left, I asked him, like, hey, can I have your presentation? Because he was a Civil War, that was what he did. He loved the Civil War. So I had these great presentations, but they had a lot of grammatical errors or just different things in them, like misspellings. And the first group of students that I ever showed it to, because I didn't do my due diligence and properly edit it, they were just like cringing. And so I just kept it, because it was funny to watch the reaction. But I wanted them to see it's okay. And that's one of the things, like with teachers, I have to work with them on, if a student corrects you, use it as an opportunity to be like, oh, well, let's verify that. Look it up, go on the Chromebook, or whatever it might be. But don't sit there and get in an argument with a 12-year-old. Because no one's winning in that power struggle. But use that as an opportunity. And from a parental perspective, this is an important thing. If you make a mistake, it's important to show your students, you know what, I made a mistake. So often we want to have this I'm perfect, can't do anything wrong image that it's not helping our kids. Now, I'm not saying come in and sit down and be like, let me talk about how I completely messed up today. But if they see something or they catch something, use teachable moments to teach them appropriate ways. But don't be afraid to address it. One other thing that we need to also do when we talk about self-image in the transition to middle school is we need to be comfortable being ourselves with our students. One of the things, if you can't tell from the fact that I made an entire presentation based off of the comic strip, is I'm a bit nerdy. I'm a giant nerd. When I had my classroom, it was wall-to-wall superhero, giant cutouts, posters of superheroes. I had an entire bookshelf dedicated to pop figures, and each shelf was dedicated to the appropriate like fandom. And now I have an office, so I don't have the same space, but I still have superhero pictures on. And I have kids come in for discipline, and they're like, "So you like Batman?" I'm like, "Yeah, but let's talk." And they're like, "Oh, Harry Potter." I'm like, "Focus." But we need to be comfortable sharing with our gifted middle school students that we're comfortable with who we are. One of the things in Calvin and Hobbes, that Calvin's dad is an avid bike rider. And so we see this Sunday comic here. And so I'm going to take a moment to step outside and geek out about Bill Watterson for a second. So we're gonna get back to Gifted, but he's a gifted individual, and we talk about risks, and I love talking about those. So we're gonna do, but we'll get back to this. But Bill Watterson, being the gifted cartoonist that he is, he loved his art. And so one of the things about comic strips is that because they are published across newspapers and all that, they need a strict structure. So daily comics have the typical 4-panel structure, 4 inches by 13 is what it's drawn on, and then shrunk down. They have a common structure. Sunday comics also have a set structure where they can be rearranged to fit either the block structure or a vertical structure. They can be edited. You can remove the top layer. Like, there's a certain art form that goes into it. Bill Watterson, though, reached a point in his career where he basically said, I want to be able to do my art the way I want to do my art. So I'm going to not follow the typical structure. He took a risk and said, I'm going to draw my Sunday comics using the full scope of what I have. And so if you read Calvin and Hobbes, go to Barnes & Noble, they've always got collections on sale. Look through some of the later volumes, you'll see his Sunday comics take up entire pages with like these in-depth illustrations because he wanted to do his art for it. And he basically said, if you don't like that, if that doesn't fit with your newspaper, then you can drop Calvin and Hobbes, which for a cartoonist is a huge risk because you're paid by how many newspapers are carrying your comic. But he did what he needed to do for his art because it's what he felt was the best. So I just like to watch this. I wanted to tell the story. So back to Gifted. But so we have Calvin's dad. He's an avid bike rider. We see him working on his bicycle. If he walks by, Calvin laughs at his outfit. He's driving, people are riding on the road, people are yelling at him. He falls down a hill. Calvin laughs at him again. And then he says, the secret to enjoying your job is to have a hobby that's even worse. And so I think my favorite thing is the laughter that Calvin has, just like pointing at his dad, wearing his bike shorts, carrying his bike, and all of that. But what this comic shows is that Calvin's dad is comfortable with who he is and what he loves. And one of the things that we can do is to share what we love with our gifted students. Because they're at a point where they are having to make choices about who they are and what they enjoy. Now, I'm not saying that you have to sit your child down and be like, all right, let's watch Andy Griffith, or whatever your passion is. But by being comfortable with who you are, it allows them to see that example. When I was teaching the DLC, so like I said, comics all over, at the end of the year, I had a student that wrote me a letter thanking me for his time in the DLC. And one of the things that he told me in that letter was when he got to middle school, he didn't think it was okay to like action figures and toys. But he got into my class and he saw that it was okay. And that he felt comfortable putting his toys back up on the shelf. And that just melted my heart. Here we have a child that has a passion. He loves collectibles. He loves action figures. For Christmas that year, he took one of his like WWE Build-A-Wrestler figures and painted it to be a Mr. Graham action. But this was a child that was not comfortable with who he was, not comfortable with what his passion was. Now, I didn't sit him down and say, listen, child, it's okay to like toys and comic books. I didn't have that overt discussion with him. At no point did I even draw attention to, guys see my comic book stuff? I like comics. I didn't address that. I was just who I was. And he felt comfortable with that. And my students, Lord, Mr. Graham loves what he loves. I had many students that would raise eyebrows the first Tuesday that we would have, and I'd be like, guys, it is Tuesday, and we are listening to Taylor Swift music all day. And they're like, wait, what? And I would get these odd looks at them, or from them. And I'd be like, I like Taylor Swift music. Deal with it. But I will tell you that I had more students come up and talk to me about One Direction because of Taylor Tuesdays than I think I ever would have had. I learned more about Harry Styles' feud than I ever wanted to know about. And I didn't say, children, tell me about what you're interested in. I just showed what I cared about. And one of the things that I encourage you to do is love what you love. Have your hobbies. Invite your children, but if they say, no, I do not want to do that, don't feel like you have to force them. But by showing, hey, this is what I love, you're going to make them feel more comfortable. And I encourage you to ask them about things that they're interested in too. Because ultimately, we want our gifted students to feel comfortable to dance in their pajamas to classical music turned up to 78 RPM. That's what we want. We want them to be comfortable with who they are. We want them to be confident that whatever they're choosing to do is right by them. So we're going to shift gears from self-image. We're going to talk about dealing with hardships. Because middle school is filled with a lot of hardships for our gifted students. And when I say hardships, some are big deals, some are big deals to our students. But ultimately what it comes down to is that we need to understand how to work with our students in these situations. One of the things that we want to do with our gifted middle school students is we want to encourage them to get involved and try new things. One of the cool things about middle school is that gifted students have a choice. In elementary school, your schedule is set. Your electives are on a daily basis. And if you don't like art, you're going to have art every 5 days, or whatever the rotation is. And if you love art, you only get art once every 5 days. And it's a frustrating thing. In PE, you might get a few weeks of basketball, and then you're done with that, and you don't get basketball season after that. But once you get to middle school, you get choice. One of the things we want to encourage our gifted students to do is to try to get involved. Because it's at this time that they're going to start discovering who they are and what they love. I really like this strip from Calvin's dad comes up and says, you're just going to sit inside all day. You should go outside and play outside and get some fresh air. So we see Calvin and Hobbes put on their winter gear and go outside and do the exact same thing that they were doing inside. Now, our gifted middle schoolers are going to have the things that they love. I'm not telling you to say, no, you can't draw anymore. You're going out for basketball. But there are opportunities to encourage them to put themselves out there. Because here's one of the things. When they try something new, they're taking risks. And they might experience failure. And obviously we don't want our children to be sad, but those are opportunities to work with them. I coached, when I taught in the DLC, I coached 3 of the 4 boys sports because I have no idea why. It was a lot, but I loved it. And one of the things I always encouraged my students, every sport, was like, come out for basketball, come out for boys wrestling, come out for track. And you started to see a shift where you would see giant proportions of the student body that were going out for these sports being my students. I was like, yes. And it gave opportunities to talk with kids. I had students that would go out for basketball and I'd see them getting frustrated. I'd be like, hey, is basketball your #1 thing that you're most passionate about? Like, do you secretly have Michael Jordan tattooed across your back and all of that? And they're like, no, I've never played before and I kind of dislike this. And I'm like, then why are you getting frustrated? Just have fun. But it gave those opportunities to have those discussions in an environment that might be more safe than, hey, you failed the science test. One of the other things that we need our gifted students to believe that we believe that they can succeed. And so this sounds obvious, but we're going to look at a comic here in just a second that I want you to kind of reflect on a little bit. So we see Calvin, he takes the ball, he throws it up, he's tracking it, he's running around, he swings, and the ball falls and he misses it completely. And his dad says, I wouldn't be worried about this if he was a better student. So this is a very funny comic. We have a really great setup. The visual of Calvin running around and swinging is great. The deadpan reaction of his dad is hilarious. But if we think about this in a deeper sense, his dad has now undercut him at 2 different places, academically and athletically. And reading Calvin and Hobbes, there are a lot of little comments like this throughout the comic. If you looked at the one where they were dancing, Calvin's dad says, "I'm calling the orphanage in the morning." Little things like that. Where Calvin has loving parents that, in typical like sitcom comic strip fashion, they have to have their snarky remarks and all that. But deep down, they take care of Calvin. But the difficult thing is that comments like this come up more often than I think we would anticipate. In a 1992 study from Garibaldi, he found that African American students' motivation to be academically successful was influenced by educators' level of expectations of them. So essentially what this is saying is that in this study, when teachers believed that these students could be successful, they were. When they believed that the students weren't going to be successful, they weren't. My bachelor's degree is in special education. And one of the things that they talk about that is a study that was done with fleas. And essentially, if you take a bunch of fleas and put them in a jar and leave them in there, they're going to jump and hit the ceiling. Keep hitting the ceiling, keep hitting the ceiling, all of that. And once you remove the jar, the fleas can only jump as high as the ceiling that you set for them. And there have been studies done about this, where teachers are giving classes of students, and one teacher's told you have the gifted students, and another teacher's told you don't have the gifted students. And the ways that the teachers respond to the exact same level students that aren't gifted is dramatically different. And so one of the things that happens when we get into middle school, we start seeing doubt creep in. Because what we understand is that for middle school students, they are doubting themselves every step of the way. Because remember, they now have 7 teachers that they're trying to get validation from. 7 teachers that they might not connect with. They are trying to get validation from their peers. They're trying to pick a lane of who they're going to be. And there's a lot happening. So one of the big things is that we need to help our students know that we believe in them and have those discussions. Because we want to work to create an environment of trust and security for students. One of the novels that I would teach my students was S.C. Hinton's The Outsiders. It dealt with gangs in the 60s. And, the narrator, Pony Boy, he's an incredibly talented student, very bright, just a great kid that is born into poor circumstances. And so part of this novel is him understanding that not only who he is and becoming accepting of that, but also understanding that it doesn't matter where you're born, everyone has problems. And so one of the things that I would use with this is, we were talking about the plot, the kids always love it, right? We would spend a good amount of time talking about who we are as gifted students, what it means to be gifted, do you fit in, things like that. So we'd have these deep discussions. And so one of the things that we were talking about when we were going through this was what it means to be gifted and understanding kind of perceptions of giftedness. And it was really sad one day. We were talking, and I had a student that shared, you know, it gets really hard because I'll do things that I've never tried before. My parents will say, "Hey, can you do this?" And I won't be able to do it. And the response from my parents is, "I thought you were the gifted one." And I can tell you, and when that student said that, multiple other students were like, "Oh yeah, no, I've done this," and it was like this chorus of kids saying this. And I can tell you, from the parents that I work with, none of them were malicious, like trying to undercut their kids. They loved their kids so dearly. But a little snide remark had a lasting impact. It was something that these students remember. Something that's stuck. So we want to be careful how we address these comments. How we address our gifted students. We want to make sure that if we're talking to them, they go out for wrestling, and they get penned in 3 seconds. We're not like, boy, you're not Hulk Hogan or anything. We need to be careful with how we phrase those things. Because what we don't want is we don't want our students to not feel comfortable coming to us with big problems. When we talk about this idea of trust, we have a Sunday comic here, and Calvin says, I can't sleep. I think nighttime is dark, so you can imagine your fears with less distraction. At nighttime, the world always seems so big and scary, and I always seem so small. I wish I could fall asleep so it would be morning. Sigh. Look at Hobbs. He's asleep. He sure looks funny when he sleeps. Tigers close their eyes so tight. I wonder what he's dreaming about. Good old Hobbs. What a friend. Things are never quite as scary when you've got a best friend. Calvin is able to go to sleep. So when we look at this, think about the things that Calvin is saying. I think nighttime is dark, so you can imagine your fears with less distinction. Also, that the world seems so big and scary, and I always seem so small. We have our students going from elementary school. If they're in gifted self-contained classes, they might be in a class of 15, 20 kids, if not less. They understand the world. And then they jump into middle school. And they're at schools with 500, 600, 700 kids. And the world is coming up in all sorts of directions. Ultimately, we want to make sure that we are there to help them feel comfortable. We want them to build themselves and realize that we're there for them. Hobbs does nothing in this comic other than be present and have established himself as a constant in Calvin's life. When we talk about this as well, we also need to help our gifted students know that it is okay to ask for help. And that comes with that idea of trust. Building that in. You know, I've worked with a lot of gifted students, and they all seem to like dig their heels in and be like, I'm not asking for help, I'm gonna do it on my own. And whenever they would get there, the first project I would always give them, or the first group project that I would kind of tell them up front, guys, I'm gonna step back and I'm gonna let you handle this. And we're gonna see what happens. If you have problems, talk to me. And inevitably, the day before, tears streaming down faces, panic happening, and they're like, I don't know what's going on. And I'm like, chill. I expected this, and we're gonna work through it. But we want them to develop that ability to ask for help. Because if things get really bad, we want them to know that we are there for them. Now, when it comes to asking for help, there's a myriad of ways that we work with this. We have to help our gifted students kind of weigh out. Because I've seen students on one end that are, I'm never asking for help, and I see students that the first sign of struggle, they run home and they're like, Mom, send me an email! And like, I get the email, I'm like, that wasn't like a big deal. But so we can see here that Calvin says, hey Mom, when's lunch? And she says, later Calvin, I'm busy. He shrieks, but I'm hungry now, I want to eat. And she gives her a map to the refrigerator. She gives him a map to the refrigerator. Because he needs to experience that himself. When we work on this, we need to allow our students to struggle to build them up from there. One of the things that we have to be careful of is the first thing that our students come up to us with is swooping in to fix the problem. We need to help them to develop that and weigh out and develop those self-advocacy skills. You know, one of the things that I tell students, like in parents, when their student won't come to me and they're sending emails is, write email with your student. Have them send the email. And then that gives me a catalyst to talk to them face to face so we can build that. But for some students, that's the help and support that they need. So when we work with this, we have to kind of weigh out when to swoop in and when to let them struggle a bit and build up that understanding. Because ultimately, advocacy is what we want our students to do. We want them to be comfortable to go and try to address problems themselves. But the only way that we can do that is if we have those conversations. Because if they're not comfortable asking you for help, you don't get the opportunity to talk to them about, this is a problem that you can handle, or that's a big deal, I'm stepping in. Because ultimately, we want them to be those students that are going to high school and college, able to say, hey, this is a problem I have. We don't want our gifted students to be like, I got a bad grade on a college exam. Mom, please email my teacher. And I have friends that teach at the collegiate level that get emails from parents. And we don't want our students feeling that way. We want them to know this is how you go about doing this. Because ultimately, middle school, they could get into some bad things. And we want them to feel comfortable calling us. Calvin calls his dad and says, hi dad, it's me, Calvin. How's work going, huh? Uh-huh. Pretty day out, isn't it? Yup. Are you bringing me any presents tonight? No? Well, just thought I'd ask. Listen, I suppose you're wondering why I called. Calvin says the water is almost to the top of the door frame. Ultimately, we want our students to come to us for how to solve this problem. And the reason I love this comic is because, yes, it's funny and Calvin's going to his dad, but is his dad there? No. How do we fix this problem? His dad has to Calvin to fix it. Now, that's not to say that there are some times that you have to intervene immediately. Calvin's sitting there hammering nails on the table. His mom says, Calvin, what are you doing to the coffee table? He looks at his work and says, is this some sort of trick question or what? If your student is doing something obviously dangerous, there's a bad situation, those are times to swoop in. But we need to weigh out and develop those. And in spite of all of this, I know we've made light of a lot of the situations. For our gifted students, middle school is still a really difficult place. They're having to weigh a lot. Sometimes friendships are going to be hardships. Sometimes teachers, no matter what they do, the personality is not going to be there. It's not coming to the line. And there's going to be those moments that our gifted students just are struggling. And no matter what we do, it doesn't feel like we can help. And that's a difficult place to be. And part of this comes from perfectionism. And we can look at perfectionism is not about doing your best or striving for high goals. Instead, you block your ability to do well. It takes a heavy toll on your self-esteem, relationships, creativity, health, and capacity to enjoy life. Because perfection isn't possible, deciding that's what you want and that you won't be satisfied with anything less is a recipe for disappointment. We have students that are going to be perfectionists that are going to be disappointed. Even outside of that, we have students that are going to struggle immensely with different things. And when we look at situations like that, what do we do? This comic right here came at the end of a fairly long story arc that Bill Watterson did, where the bully comes up and takes Calvin's toy and doesn't give it back. So Calvin goes through a series of comics where he's trying to get back his truck. And one of the things I love about Bill Watterson is he's not afraid to address the negative. This story does not have an happy ending. Calvin doesn't get his truck back. And he has to deal with this awful failure. He says, you know, sometimes world things like a unique place. And Hobbes says that's why animals are so soft. And he's just there for Calvin. One of the things that we have to understand is that we need to be the support when things happen. One of the things I hope you see is how all of these things kind of build on each other, building up to this. Because we can try, we can intervene, we can do all of these things. And just like our gifted students might face failure, there are things that we're going to do that, like I said, you can't control. If they don't get along with a teacher, or they're struggling and meeting that resistance for the first time, and they scrape by with a C, we can pep talk them all we want, but still be disappointed. Sometimes that's being assured of a cry, and sometimes that's just giving them a hug. But we need to be that support for them. Because one of the things when we look at everything going on everything is in chaos. Even their own bodies are changing and chaotic. You're the one constant in their lives. So just like Hobbes is saying, you get to be there for them. Now, we're going to shift gears a little bit, something a little bit more fun and cheery. And we're going to talk about taking some time to slow down. Now, one of the things I know from talking to gifted middle school students is that there's a lot going on in their lives. I've talked to kids about that weren't doing their homework, and I'm like, why aren't things happening? Like, what's going on? And I would get a variety of answers. But I would have kids that would be like, well, I leave school and then I go to festival sports, and so I'm at basketball from 2:30 to 4 o'clock, and then I get picked up, and then we have to go, and then we usually stop at the drive-through to get dinner, and then I have taekwondo for 2 hours, and I help clean for a half an hour after that because I am given that extra responsibility, and then we have to drive to go pick up my brother from his baseball practice, and that's another 30 minutes out of the way, and then we drive 30 minutes back home. So I get home around 9:30, and I'm working on my Chromebook in the car, and it's like, oh my gosh, you're busier than I am. So one of the things I want to talk about is taking some time to slow down. Because gifted students typically have very involved lives. A lot of gifted students I've met have a variety of interests, and they're all trying to do all of them at once. But one of the things I think is important is that we tell our students that it's okay to slow down. And also for you to acknowledge, you're busy too, and it's chaotic. Parents need to relax, slow down, activities are fine, but don't get over the top. Research says that what children need most are relationships, not activities. Focus on building meaningful relationships with your children, not becoming their chauffeur. I've talked to parents that I don't know how they do it. Like when I talk to parents that their kids are in Little League, I'm like, oh my gosh, like it's crazy. And I look back at my own parents. I did martial arts, band, drama, all these things in high school. I'm like, I don't know how you made it work. But one of the things I think is important is that we take those moments to work with the students. It's okay to be a kid. Whenever we'd have 3-day weekends or holidays, my homework for my students would always be the same thing. Play a video game, or binge watch a show, or read a book for fun, or play a sport that you're not part of a club and just go out and have fun, do an art project, or take a walk in nature. That would be their homework, and I would publish it on my website. And I would have kids be like, can I write that in my planner? And I'm like, yes, do something fun. Treat yourself. Because they don't do that. And we want to make sure that they're okay with that. Now, obviously, there's a continuum. If your child is doing nothing but playing Switch all day long, yeah, intervene. But there's nothing wrong. If your child on a weekend sits down and plays some video games, I encourage that because they need that downtime. They need that opportunity to decompress. Calvin and Hobbes are sitting here talking, and Hobbes says, you know what I like about summer days? They're just made for doing things, even if it's nothing. Calvin says, especially if it's nothing. I've talked to kids that during their summer vacations, they're like wanting this camp, this camp, this camp. And I decided to read War and Peace. And I'm like, why? And they're like, it might look good on a college application. I'm like, no college application is going to ask you read War and Peace. I'm like, no. We want our kids to be kids. They only get a small amount of time for that. So I highly encourage your children to be kids. And then I know we've talked a lot of, I don't want to say doom and gloom, but we've addressed a lot of different things about middle school. But one of the coolest things about middle school is it's a fresh start for every kid. It's an opportunity for them to discover new things about themselves, to go out and try things. I know that I talked about how when we talk about high school, we talk about the grades matter and all of this. And I'm not trying to devalue middle school, but middle school, you get to take risks. If you do the festival sport and you try out for basketball, you're like, boy, this is not for me. You didn't lose anything. You can try all 4 festival sports and you're not sitting there having to weigh out, ooh, do I have to play football or basketball? Being the assistant principal at a high school, I see kids that are debating, like trying to juggle several different activities. And they're like, ooh, do I do AP Spanish or am I part of the band? Do I play football or what if that interferes with my ability to play baseball? So no, they're sitting there having to do that. But at middle school, they get to try, they get to have fun. I had so many kids that had no intention of playing half the sports that we did in the festival. They would just do it because it was fun. They got to hang out with their friends for 4 weeks. And they got to experience things. They got to challenge themselves. Middle school is ultimately a freshman possibilities. And yeah, it can be scary. And that can be difficult as a parent to see. Thank you. So special. This right here is the final Calvin and Hobbes strip that was ever published. It's a really special one. Calvin and Hobbes in their typical winter fashion, when they go out and they're walking through the snow, and Calvin says, wow, it really snowed last night. Isn't it wonderful? Hobbes says, everything familiar has disappeared. The world looks brand new. Calvin says, a new year, a fresh, clean start. Hobbes says it's like having a big white sheet of paper to draw on, a day full of possibilities. It's a magical world, Hobbes will tell you. Let's go explore. One of the greatest things about middle school, and one of the things I love about it, is you have students that are kind of caught in a limbo. They're still connected to their elementary school themselves. They're still kids at heart. Yet they're trying to do this. And a lot of teachers, I'm going to look at that as a piece of frustration. They're like, I don't get it. We're sitting there, we're talking about like this incredibly in-depth thing, and then my kids are sitting there making fart noises. I don't get it. But that's one of the things I loved about this. You have an opportunity, you have a transitionary period where your kid still gets to laugh at silly things. They get to say that they love the Lego movie and they come in singing everything is awesome. But you also get to sit there and push them, challenge them, and see like, my kid is going to be something special. And yeah, there might be some bumps in the road.